All right. Well, thank you again, San Diego. I am going to have a presentation that's complementary to Dave Meiswinkle's. I'm going to be focusing on why San Diego is so important for 9/11 truth. I'm going to be focusing on you all and what happened here before and after 9/11. Luckily, nothing happened on 9/11 here in San Diego, but a lot happened in San Diego before 9/11, and it's incredibly important for 9/11 truth in our investigation after 9/11. But before I begin...
Talk into your microphone a little more. We can't hear you very good.
This one here?
Yeah, right?
Can you hear me? Yeah. I think they can hear me fine. I can sure hear myself. Okay. A little louder? All right. All right. I'm as close to the mic as I can get, really. But before I begin with my formal presentation, I want to recognize two really important people, and later I'll be recognizing a third further on in my talk. But I'm going to be recognizing first, I want people to understand how important our attorney heroes are to 9/11 truth. One of the things that Cheri didn't mention in my introduction is that I am on the board of the Lawyers Committee for 9/11 Inquiry as well. I know Dave Meiswinkle did. So there are 7 members of us on the board, and Dave showed you all of us. We're a small group of people. But remember what Margaret Mead said? I'm going to probably massacre the quote, but it's her famous quote to the effect that the only thing that's ever really made a difference in the world is a small group of passionately dedicated people. And that's exactly what the 9/11 Lawyers Committee is. So thank you for all of your support, for being here, and anything you can donate financially or in terms of your time, if you have real expertise, to the Lawyers Committee. We really appreciate it. So I want to first and foremost thank the Lawyers Committee for 9/11 Inquiry. And then I want to recognize someone who is in the audience. If our videographer can move the camera to him in a moment. Many of you know who Ellen Mariani was. Ellen Mariani, to my understanding, I can be corrected by her attorney here in a minute, but Ellen Mariani, if I understand correctly, was the only 9/11 victim's family member. She lost her husband in the World Trade Center on 9/11, the only one who wanted truth instead of the blood and hush money, from the Feinberg Fund. All right. So Ellen Mariani's attorney is Bruce Lichty, and though unfortunately Ellen Mariani is no longer with us, Bruce is here today, and let's get a big hand for Bruce Lichty. You can stand up, Bruce. All right. All right. And then I would like to just personally make a personal note before I begin my formal presentation, which isn't going to be as long as Dave's. And that is, I would just like Commissioner Chris Gioia to know that for those of us who have been in the 9/11 Truth movement right from the beginning, there are a few of us who have, I'm one of them, but many of us have been in for years, over a decade, maybe even longer. It is an uphill battle. It is a long, hard slug. And every once in a while, a miracle happens. And Chris Gioia, coming forward with his fire commissioners in New York, is one of those blessed miracles. And I want to personally thank you. And Chris, for later, I've actually made this cap for you. It says, "Make America America Again." Yeah. Okay. All right. Okay. And then Chris is going to be speaking after I do, and I know we're all really looking forward to that. Okay. So, make sure my next slide is up. Yes. Yeah. So, the San Diego Nexus. All right. What's important for people to understand is, maybe I should take this off. Is this better?
Yes.
All right. I'm just going to do this. So, what people need to understand here in San Diego is how incredibly important the whole nexus of San Diego information is to 9/11 truth. And that's both for the huge case, it's called the Motley Rice lawsuit, of thousands, literally thousands of 9/11 victims' family members against the government of Saudi Arabia. And that case is ongoing. It's been ongoing for years. For over 14 years, the government of the United States, the court system, would not allow that case to move forward because of what's called sovereign immunity. And you're going to see here in a moment how we finally broke through the sovereign immunity, not only of the Saudi government, but every single government, unfortunately, except for the government of the United States, the one that really matters for 9/11. But we did finally break through sovereign immunity for every single foreign government in the world, for any event, for any terrorist attack or support of a terrorist attack against United States citizens on United States soil. Okay, so you're going to see here in this presentation the importance of the San Diego Information Nexus to that huge lawsuit, and also to a lesser extent, but also to the very, very important 9/11-5 case against Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, the alleged mastermind of 9/11 according to the official story, and 4 others of the so-called 9/11-5. And their cases actually, the Trump administration has slated that to begin on January 11th of next year, 2021, only 9 days before whoever is the next elected president of the United States, whether it's Trump or someone else. But as you're going to see, there's a link to that as well. Okay. Unfortunately, I'm not able to see that slide on my screen, so I have to look up at the screen. So, right. So the case against the Saudis by the 9/11 victims' family members was finally released was finally allowed to go forward because the famous 28 pages of the House Senate Intelligence Committee investigation, which was the first one, and that report was published in the spring of 2002, quite soon after 9/11, at least 2 years before, a little bit more before the 9/11 Commission, which was the second official report on 9/11. So the 28 pages were a chapter, 28, actually 29 pages long, but it's called the 28 pages in that House Senate Joint Intelligence Committee investigation of the intelligence aspect of the 9/11 attacks according to the official story. So those 28 pages were classified and held secret by both administrations of the Bush-Cheney administration, and also all 8 years of Obama until just the very end of the Obama administration. And they were finally released. And you can read the 28 pages for yourself at that link that is up on the screen. And I highly recommend it. All right. So in the rest of this presentation, as part of the presentation about the Motley Rice lawsuit against the Saudi government, I want you to keep in mind throughout that that lawsuit is predicated upon the official story of 9/11 being true, i.e. that 19 hijackers, 15 of them were Saudis, really did what the government said they did. Now, of course, that's highly problematic, but I just want to remind you that it is based upon the official story of 9/11. All right. Just a couple of slides, just so that you can put a big question mark, and this is only just the tip of the iceberg, but of course we need to put huge question marks on the official story of 9/11, in particular about the hijackers, and I'm going to give you 2 really good links to follow up if you'd like. This is an important chapter in this anthology called What We Now Know About the Alleged, I underline alleged 9/11 hijackers, by Kolar, which was published in this anthology a number of years ago. And another really good one is this chapter 13 of this book by Elias Davidson, who is a European 9/11 researcher, and chapter 3 is on why the official story about the hijackers cannot be true and is not true. But again, everything going forward now is based upon the assumption that the official story is true about the hijackers, and that is the assumption of the Motley Rice lawsuit that we're going to be talking about. But back to, oh, here's another one. So I just want to remind you, what would happen if the Motley Rice lawsuit went forward? And I think there's something like 6,000 9/11 victims' family members in this lawsuit as plaintiffs. What happens if, remember all of those, at least 6, if not 8, alleged hijackers, 15 of the 19 allegedly Saudis, right after 9/11, in the 48 hours after 9/11, a whole bunch of them came forward and said, "Hey, a minute, I'm still alive." And they were interviewed by the BBC, etc. So what if the case goes forward and all the Saudis have to do is bring even one, if not multiples of those still alive alleged hijackers into the court in the ultimate Perry Mason moment? So those are big problems with that Motley Rice lawsuit against Saudi Arabia, but nevertheless it's moving forward, and we're going to be talking about now what's important about what happened here in San Diego before 9/11 for that lawsuit. Okay, so after 15 years, some of you don't know, and maybe those in the wider audience don't know, but after almost 15 years, back in 2016, in the summer of 2016, how was it that those famous 28 pages were finally declassified and released, despite every effort of both administrations of Bush and Cheney and Obama, right up to the end of Obama? And the bottom line is it was the right idea at the right time, and it turns out it was my idea. So this is me with someone you probably recognize. This is former Senator Mike Gravel of the famous Pentagon Papers, and that is his wonderful wife Whitney, and they happen to live just up the road from me in the Monterey Peninsula of California. So in the summer, the late spring, early summer of 2016, I was listening to a radio show. One or more of the Jersey girls were being interviewed, and some of the plaintiffs in the big lawsuit against the Saudis, and they were so upset that they still couldn't break through the sovereign immunity of a foreign government, in this case Saudi Arabia. And I was so angered by it that I asked my guidance what to do about it, and I woke up with the answer. And the answer was, we need a Mike Gravel for the 28 pages, and who better than the real Mike Gravel, who just happened to live up the street. And so I called up Mike Gravel, and I went to meet with him, and I said, Mike, your country needs you. What we need you to do is to fly to Washington, D.C., and sit down with the handful of members of the House and the Senate who have read the 28 pages in the classified reading room. They haven't been allowed to even take in a piece of paper and a pencil. They take away your cell phone. All you have is your memory. But all you have to do, Mike, is tell them that from their memory, all they have to do is go on the floor of the House or the Senate and just say into the congressional record what it was that they remembered from the 28 pages, and the cat's out of the bag, just like the Pentagon Papers were out of the bag when you did what you did. And your case, Mike, went all the way to the Supreme Court. There's now a Supreme Court decision, Gravel versus the United States, in which the Supreme Court found for Mike Gravel, and the Supreme Court is very explicit in that case, that anything that a member of the House or the Senate, a sitting member of Congress, says in any capacity, in their official capacity as a member of Congress, has absolute immunity under the Constitution, even if it's classified information that was stolen. There's actually a lower court decision based upon U.S. versus or Gravel versus U.S. about that. So Mike Gravel did do that, bless his soul. He went to Washington, D.C., and he met with these members of Congress or their staffs who had actually read the 28 pages, and they understood that they had the power to release the 28 pages, and it wasn't long before, in fact, Congress as a whole understood that, and Congress released those 28 pages, and there was nothing the Obama White House could do about it. And once the 28 pages were released, all right, so Oh, you should know that the entire Western and Allied intelligence communities tried to stop what happened next. So after the 28 pages were released, the 28 pages, I think we can go forward. Yeah. So you need to know, no? I wish I could see the slide before the one I see here. So the entire Western and Allied intelligence establishment tried to stop what happened after the 28 pages were released. Why did they try to stop it? JASTA stands for the Justice Against Sponsors of Terrorism Act. So once the 28 pages were released, and you can read them, I gave you the link, the 28 pages have 17 references to Prince Bandar, who at the time, before, on, and after 9/11, Prince Bandar, so close to the Bush family that he was known by them as Bandar Bush. He was the Saudi ambassador to the United States before, during, and after 9/11, for quite a while after 9/11. And he is 17 times in the 28 pages. And there is a whole nexus of support for these alleged Saudi hijackers before 9/11 by Prince Bandar. And there are middlemen between Prince Bandar in terms of support, in terms of financial support, getting them money, in terms of finding them places to live, in terms of their being trained as pilots in the United States, all kinds of support for these alleged Saudi hijackers between Prince Bandar. So there are cutouts, as they call them, or intermediaries. Okay, so once the cat was out of the bag and the 28 pages were released, then it was only a very short period of time before the 9/11 victims' family members, most of them in the Motley Rice lawsuit, put pressure on Congress to pass the Justice Against Sponsors of Terrorism Act, which had been before Congress for a long time, but had not passed because the cocked gun of the content of the 28 pages was not yet to every member of Congress's head to vote. So the very first vote on JASTA was unanimous in both the House and the Senate. And then Obama heinously vetoed. He took the side of the government of Saudi Arabia against the thousands of 9/11 victims' family members, and then Congress overrode that veto. In the Senate, almost unanimously, I think there were 2 or 3 abstentions. I don't believe anyone voted against it. In the House, it was near unanimous. That was the only veto of Obama's ever overridden in his entire 8 years as President of the United States. So JASTA is now the law of the land in the United States, which allows not only for the government of Saudi Arabia, but for the government of any foreign country, every government except our own, the US government, if there is credible evidence that a foreign government has either committed a terrorist act, their agents, covert or overt, have committed a terrorist act against US citizens on US soil, then their sovereign immunity is removed, and ordinary citizens can bring lawsuits against them in US courts. So, as a result of JASTA being passed, the Motley Rice lawsuit attorneys went back into court, and their case was allowed to move forward finally. And it is in the courts right now. It is still in the discovery process, but it is moving forward in the courts. It is interesting that before JASTA was passed, every single member of the establishment intelligence community, not just in the United States, current and former CIA directors, current and former directors of national intelligence, in Europe, in the UK, in Pakistan, they all went public on TV in their countries and here, saying, please don't pass JASTA. That would overturn the very foundation of international law. Well, that's what happened, and our lawyers committee, in particular myself and Mick Harrison, our litigation director, and Mike Gravel were really centrally instrumental in overturning the foundation of international law. So that is I know that the Lawyers Committee is going to have many, many more successes, but if that were our only accomplishment, it is huge. It is truly huge moving forward in the whole world, not just in the United States. Okay, next slide. And you should know that as a result of what we accomplished with JASTA, legal scholars and historians are now paying real attention to 9/11 truth information. And this is just one of many examples. 9/11 as a false flag, why international law must dare to care. And I highly recommend you looking up that article. All right. So, now back to the San Diego nexus with that context. Back to the San Diego information nexus about 9/11 truth. So, it's important for you to understand that the 28 pages are only about 2 of the alleged 9/11 hijackers, only 2 of them. Both Saudis, and both, coincidentally, according to the official story, again, on just one of the 4 planes, the Pentagon plane, as it turns out. So the 28 pages is about these 2 guys, Al-Hazmi and Al-Midar, and their pre-9/11 attack San Diego support by Prince Bandar and his Saudi government intermediaries. And this just shows you, kind of in a graphic way, how close President Bush and the whole Bush family is to Prince Bandar, that they referred to him as part of the family as Bandar Bush. And then this is a great photograph. This is only 2 days after 9/11. This is on the Truman balcony in the White House, where Prince Bandar, the Saudi ambassador to the United States, who's 17 times in the 28 pages, that he is meeting with President Bush, Vice President Cheney, National Security Advisor Condoleezza Rice, and some unidentified gentleman. You can only see his shoes in the lower left. I don't know who that is, and I haven't been able to find out. But they were celebrating with cigars, celebrating on the White House balcony 2 days after 9/11 with Prince Bandar. That's how close they are. All right. Now, this is an important slide. It graphically shows what I just said, and that is, this is the so-called San Diego nexus that is so critical to the 28 pages, and the 28 pages are central to the Motley Rice lawsuit against the Saudi government as we are speaking. It's in discovery now, and we're talking about thousands of plaintiffs who are 9/11 victims, family members, and survivors, who are the plaintiffs in that suit, in that lawsuit. Okay, so over on the left is Prince Bandar, and then there were these, actually 3. This graphic shows 2 of the intermediaries who are in the 28 pages. There's also a 3rd, whose name I can't pronounce. It begins with a T. But over on the right are these 2 hijackers, alleged hijackers, who entered the United States in early 2000. And they were set up in their apartment, in their housing, in their training, in their finances by these intermediaries of Prince Bandar. So these two hijackers are central, and only those 2, to the 28 pages, and therefore, because the 28 pages are central to the Motley Rice lawsuit, with thousands of 9/11 victims' family members as plaintiffs, these 2 guys are really important. Okay, and this one of the 2 hijackers, alleged hijackers in the 28 pages, Nawaf al-Hazmi, is going to be particularly important for what I'm going to say here in a little bit. All right, this is an important slide. Richard Clarke was the counterterrorism czar in the Bush-Cheney White House before, during, and after 9/11. He had actually been in that position in previous presidencies as well. So he's one of our country's top counterterrorism experts. So he was on the National Security Council in the White House, and if you may recall, once the 9/11 Commission started rolling, he was the guy who testified to the 9/11 Commission and said to the Jersey girls and the rest of the 9/11 victims' family members in the audience, your country failed you. He was the only one who's ever apologized, to my knowledge, officially by our federal government to these people. Not sufficiently, but he's the only one who did it at all, to my knowledge. And so he has basically become, or was made, the fall guy for the official lie of 9/11. But Richard Clarke is trying to vindicate himself. And so what's important about this particular YouTube video, and it's very short, it's maybe only about 10 minutes, I think, Everyone needs to watch this. It was done a few years ago, and it's by two so-called alternative video journalists, documentarians, and he agreed to talk with them. And basically what he tells them is that these two San Diego alleged hijackers, El Hazmi and Al Midar, if he, Clark, had only been told that they were in the country before 9/11, starting in 2000, that he, Clark, would have initiated a huge investigation in the last 2 weeks before 9/11, and he claims 9/11 would have been prevented. And he blames the then CIA director for Bush and Cheney, George Tenet, for keeping him in the dark, never telling him about those two critical alleged Saudi hijackers, the only two in the 28 pages. They were in San Diego. Okay. All right. So this next slide is about another San Diego nexus that's critically important, not only for the Motley Rice lawsuit and those two alleged Saudi hijackers from the San Diego area coming here and living here in the 2000s. And that is, believe it or not, the FBI agent who was placed in charge by FBI Director Robert Mueller, yes, the Robert Mueller. Robert Mueller put this man, Richard Lambert, in charge of the entire investigation right after the attacks of 9/11. Here in San Diego, he was with the San Diego FBI office at the time, and he was placed in charge of the entire investigation of those two alleged hijackers here in San Diego. And perhaps not coincidentally, I don't think it's a coincidence that later, after about a year of doing that investigation here, that Richard Lambert also was placed in charge of the entire anthrax letter attacks investigation. Now that's a very unusual nexus. Okay, now what you need to know about Richard Lambert, and this is really exciting, is that Richard Lambert is open to 9/11 truth. Richard Lambert is now an FBI whistleblower. He's no longer with the FBI. He sued the FBI. And I highly recommend these two articles. Head of the FBI's, that's Lambert's, anthrax investigation says the whole thing was a sham. And in particular, Richard Lambert has gone public in his lawsuit, in his complaint. And if you'd like the complaint, just ask me. It's on the web, but I can send you the link to his actual complaint, his lawsuit against the FBI, which he did not win. But the complaint contains his under oath statements about this. He says, for instance, that the FBI, the director of the FBI laboratory, withheld from him and his entire anthrax attacks investigation team the critical fact that they had found DNA on the envelopes. They kept it from their own so-called top investigator. So we're talking about Robert Mueller and on down, the very top of the FBI, making sure that the anthrax attacks were not properly investigated, and their fall guy was the guy they put in charge of it, Richard Lambert, who has now sued the FBI. The second article, former FBI agent sues FBI, claims retaliation over his misgivings in the anthrax case that he went public with, including in his suit against the FBI. So how do we know he's open to 9/11 truth? Because in 2016, the critical events that started our whole lawyers committee serious investigation of 9/11, that was held on the anniversary in 2016 in New York City. And it was called the Justice in Focus Symposium. It was put on jointly with Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth and the Lawyers Committee for 9/11 Inquiry. And at that event, we actually convened our Lawyers Committee board, and we voted to start this official investigation that we're now in. And one of our board members actually had contacted before that event Richard Lambert, because he'd already sued the FBI. We already knew he was an FBI whistleblower. And one of our board members contacted him and asked him if he would participate in our event. And he said, oh, I'd be happy to, but I have this other appointment that I have to keep. So hopefully Richard Lambert will be working with the Lawyers Committee, and I very much hope that he will and expect that he will in the near future. Okay, let's see, San Diego area witnesses, yes. So for anyone who is here in the audience or seeing this, either the audio, the edited audio, to get out all our technical glitches, the video of this program today will be on the Lawyers Committee's YouTube channel in the not too distant future. You'll be able to see this whole event. And for anyone, hopefully, who is watching the live stream, if it's still going on, if you are a witness to any of what we've talked about, please come forward to the Lawyers Committee. We are looking for witnesses to anything about 9/11 who are willing to do a sworn jurat affidavit. But probably the most important witnesses that we could have for the Motley Rice lawsuit against Saudi Arabia that's going forward right now would be anyone who was a witness to Prince Bandar himself, not an intermediary, but Prince Bandar himself being in physical presence of either Al-Hazmi or Al-Midar in 2000 here in San Diego. That would be the most important thing for them, for all those thousands of 9/11 victims' family members to win their case. All right, and so I would now like to recognize someone in the audience. I'm going to get a little emotional about this. We already have an amazing witness who has come forward to the Lawyers Committee, and we have worked with him. He has been courageous in everything he has done ever since before 9/11. He is here in the audience with us. I'm going to ask him to stand up in a minute. Believe it or not, into his place of business in Oceanside, which is in the San Diego area, in the year 2000, into his place of business came both Prince Bandar and Nawaf Al-Hazmi together. So, Robert Alexander, could you stand up, please? Thank you for your courage, Robert. We really appreciate it. You are an example. I know that either in this room or watching the live stream or watching the archive video on the Lawyers Committee's YouTube channel page, that there are other witnesses. We're looking for other witnesses to Prince Bandar being with either Nawaf Al-Hazmi and or Al-Midar and any of the other alleged 9/11 hijackers here in the San Diego area to please come forward to the Lawyers Committee. All right. We already have our one great example. This, by the way, Bob Alexander has done a sworn jurat affidavit. The Lawyers Committee has that. And this is a page from his, at the end of his sworn jurat affidavit, where he has circled two of the alleged hijackers who were physically in his presence, Nawaf Al-Hazmi and Mohammed Atta, both. Okay. So this is getting towards the end of my talk now. I want to just remind you that Richard Lambert, who sued the FBI, who's open to 9/11 Truth, we're hoping to work with him in the future, that he was the FBI agent in charge not only of the investigation of Nawaf Al-Hazmi and Al-Midar, right here in San Diego, but also later put in charge by FBI Director Mueller of the entire anthrax letter attacks investigation that is the outside of the envelope to Senator Leahy. And in those envelopes to the two senators were military-grade enhanced weaponized anthrax. It was aerolol sized, I'm probably mispronouncing that, and it was 1 trillion spores per gram. 1 trillion spores per gram. And believe it or not, we know he's no longer alive, but a man by the name of William Patrick, who was one of the top bioweapons experts for the United States government, had, and perhaps his estate now owns, but he had, while he was alive, the private patent for for producing 1 trillion spores per gram weaponized anthrax. So we know who did that. Okay, and last few slides. just to remind people, we will be following up, the Lawyers Committee will be following up all of these other areas of investigation, including eventually the anthrax letter attacks. Now, I'm taking off my Lawyers Committee hat now just to say that we're not endorsing these next two slides, but they are just to give you an example of some places where you can get really good information that you will not believe when you see it about the anthrax attacks. This is my article that was published back in 2008 in opednews.com or .org. The anthrax links to the day of 9/11 itself. Now, the official story of the anthrax attacks is that the first letter wasn't mailed till September 18th, and that the first person didn't die from it, Bob Stevens, down in American Media Inc., down in Boca Raton, Florida, the Florida area, until October 5th. However, there are serious anthrax links or anthrax simulant links in an anthrax attack simulation or war game that was going on and scheduled for September 11th and or 12th in New York City at the same time as the period of the actual attacks of 9/11. So that article I highly recommend. And also, of course, Professor Graham McQueen's wonderful book on the anthrax attacks called The 2001 Anthrax Deception, the Case for Domestic Conspiracy. And this is an excellent detailed review. If you don't have time to read the whole book, you'll learn what he says in that article. So, finishing up, it's patriotic both to know and spread and follow up 9/11 truth. We thank you for your support, and I look forward to your questions later.